The final battle of Ragnarok had not ended the cosmos, but it had irrevocably broken it. The clash between Kratos and Odin, between the Leviathan axe and Gungnir, had not just shattered divine weapons. It had fractured the very branches of Yggdrasil. The Bifrost, overloaded and corrupted, became a wild, untamed river of dimensional energy. Kratos felt the pull, a force far greater than any realm gate. He grabbed his son, Atreus, pulling the young man close. Mimir, the wise, severed head hanging from his belt, shouted a warning lost in the roar of collapsing reality. They were standing on a fragment of Asgard, a piece of a dying god's dream, and it crumbled beneath them. They fell, not into the familiar void between realms, but into a tear, a wound in the fabric of existence itself. The passage was a violent, sensory assault. Colors that screamed, sounds that bled, pressures that tore at the soul. Kratos shielded his son with his body, his own mind a fortress built of rage and grief, anchored by the single, unwavering purpose: protect the boy. They were ejected from the non-reality with the force of a siege engine's projectile. Their trajectory carried them through an unfamiliar star-dusted void, then into the atmosphere of a world that felt ancient, green, and steeped in a magic utterly unlike the sharp, runic energies of the Nine Realms. Their impact was cataclysmic. They crashed into a dense, primordial forest, a shockwave flattening ancient trees for half a mile. They lay in the smoking crater, Kratos' body already knitting itself back together from the brutal landing. Atreus unconscious but alive beside him, Mimir thankfully intact, though his eyes spun with dizzying speed. Kratos pushed himself up, his senses immediately on high alert. The air was clean, heavy with the scent of pine, damp earth, and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible tang of power, like distant cooling embers. He scanned the unfamiliar woods, the impossibly tall trees draped in moss, the silence profound and watchful. Atreus, he grunted, gently shaking his son. The boy stirred, groaning. Father? Where? What happened? Atreus blinked, taking in the alien forest, the wreckage of their passage. We are elsewhere, Kratos stated, the master of understatement. Aye, elsewhere indeed, brother. Mimir chimed in, his eyes finally focusing. Doesn't look like any of the Nine Realms I remember. Smells older, greener, less, full of gods trying to kill us, maybe? Kratos retrieved the Leviathan axe, its icy head humming faintly in the unfamiliar air. He checked the blades of chaos, strapped securely to his back. Whatever this place was, it felt ancient, powerful, and potentially hostile. His instincts, honed by centuries of war, screamed at him. They were not alone, and they were not safe. He felt it then, a subtle shift in the air, a disturbance in the psychic ether of this world. It was distant, but clear. A mind of immense power, ancient and wise, but also curious. And beneath it, closer, another presence, cold, calculating, and filled with a profound, deceptive beauty. His hand tightened on the handle of his axe. Gods? Or something else? The cycle, it seemed, was never truly broken. They needed bearings, information. Kratos, guided by a hunter's instinct, began moving through the dense forest. Atreus following close behind, bow ready, Mimir scanning their surroundings with his ever-watchful eyes. The woods felt ancient, untouched by the industry Kratos vaguely remembered from his long-lost homeland. Sunlight filtered weakly through the thick canopy, dappling the forest floor in shades of green and gold. Strange place, brother, Mimir commented, his voice low. Feels like the forests of Alfheim, but without the incessant, sparkly self-importance of the elves. Atreus, his linguistic abilities already beginning to parse the subtle sounds of the forest, picked up something else. Father, listen. Voices. Rough. Guttural. Not like any tongue I know. Kratos heard it too. A harsh, unpleasant language, filled with malice and a low, brutish cunning. He motioned for Atreus to take cover behind a massive, moss-covered boulder. He moved forward alone. A silent gray shadow amidst the trees. He saw them. A scouting party. 5 creatures, vaguely humanoid but hideously twisted. Their skin was a sallow, greenish black, their faces flat and snouted, their eyes burning with a dull, hateful red light. They were clad in crude, black iron armor and carried jagged swords and shields marked with a single, baleful, red eye. Orcs. They were arguing, their harsh voices grating on the quiet of the forest. Kratos focused, letting Atreus's passive linguistic absorption, a strange quirk of his Loki heritage, filter the meaning to him through Mimir. Smelled it, I tell you. Fire from the sky, loud crash. You smell squirrel droppings, Snaga. Nothing comes into these woods but elves or spiders. Wasn't no squirrel. Was something else. Something angry. They were discussing their arrival. They were servants of a greater power, scouting this region. Kratos's tactical mind processed the information. These were scouts, which meant a larger force was likely nearby, and they served a master, a dark lord, as their simple, fearful thoughts named him. Another god-king demanding obedience. He had heard enough. These creatures were tainted, their minds filled with nothing but hate and servitude. They were foot soldiers of the enemy, and Kratos dealt with enemies in only one way. He stepped from the shadows. The orcs spun around, startled, their crude swords raised. They saw a giant of a man, pale skin marked with red tattoos, his eyes burning with a cold, controlled fury, a great ornate axe held ready in his hands. Their reaction was predictable. With a unified, guttural roar they charged. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution. Kratos met their charge like a rock meeting a wave. The Leviathan axe became a blur of silver and frost. The first orc's head flew from its shoulders before its sword even completed its downward arc. The second was cut in half at the waist, its entrails spilling onto the forest floor. The third had its shield shattered by the sheer concussive force of the axe's impact before the blade bit deep into its chest. Atreus watched from behind the boulder, his face grim. He had seen his father fight countless times, but the sheer, brutal efficiency still left him breathless. His father did not just defeat his enemies, he annihilated them. Kratos recalled the axe as it flew back to his hand, dripping black orc blood. He drew the blades of chaos. The last 2 orcs, their courage breaking in the face of this impossible whirlwind of death, turned to flee. The chained blades lashed out like fiery serpents. They wrapped around the fleeing orcs' legs, pulling them crashing to the ground. Kratos strode forward and ended their miserable lives with 2 swift, contemptuous stamps of his heavy boot. Silence returned to the forest clearing, broken only by the drip of black blood from the blades of chaos. "Well," Mimir said, breaking the quiet, "seems the local welcoming committee isn't too friendly. Nasty little creatures, weren't they?" Kratos knelt beside the last orc he had killed. He placed a hand on its still cooling head. He did not possess Atreus's gift for languages or Mimir's vast knowledge, but he had his own ways of extracting information. He focused his will, a brutal, invasive psychic probe. He tore through the creature's simple, dying thoughts. He saw images, fragmented and crude, filtered through the orc's limited perception. A vast, black land under a sky choked with smoke. A great, fiery mountain. A tower impossibly tall, crowned with a single burning, lidless eye. And a name, whispered in terror and reverence. Sauron. He saw other images too. Elves, tall and fair, masters of these woods. A hidden city. Rings, power, deception. A great war brewing. He withdrew his mind, leaving behind only the empty husk of the orc's consciousness. He stood up, his face a mask of grim understanding. "Mordor," he growled, the name feeling alien on his tongue. "Sauron." He looked at Atreus and Mimir. "This world is at war. These creatures serve a dark lord in a land called Mordor. And there are others involved. Elves, rings of power." "Rings of power?" Mimir echoed, his brow furrowing. "Sounds suspiciously like the sort of trinkets Odin used to love handing out. Always a catch, those things." Kratos ignored the commentary. He had a target. Sauron. Another god king. another tyrant hiding in a dark land, commanding armies of monsters. The specifics were different, but the pattern was sickeningly familiar. His path was clear. He would find this Sauron, and he would end him. Deep within the hidden elven city of Ost in Edhill, the jewel of Eregion, a different kind of power resided. Not the raw, chaotic power of Mordor, nor the primal, divine fury of Kratos. This was a power of subtlety, of knowledge, of exquisite, patient manipulation. Sauron, in his fair guise as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, sat in council with Celebrimbor, the greatest of the elven smiths. Annatar appeared as an elf lord of surpassing beauty and wisdom, his eyes holding the light of distant stars, his voice a melody of reason and enlightenment. He had been in Eregion for decades, subtly guiding the Gwythe Forced Mirdan, the people of the jewel smiths, teaching them secrets of craft and power, leading them towards his ultimate goal, the forging of the rings of power. His plans were proceeding flawlessly. Celebrimbor and his kin were enthralled, their pride and their thirst for knowledge making them eager pupils. The rings were nearing completion. Soon, he would have the tools to bind all the free peoples of Middle-earth to his will. It was then that he felt the disturbance. It was not the familiar, grating static of orcish minds, nor the clear, bright chime of elven thought. It was a psychic shockwave, a blast of pure, raw, and utterly furious power, emanating from the forests bordering his domain. It was followed by the abrupt, brutal silencing of the orc scouting party he had sent into the region. Annatar paused, his serene expression momentarily flickering with something else. Surprise? Annoyance? Intrigue? He extended his own immense consciousness, a subtle, probing tendril of his will, towards the source of the disturbance. He encountered a mind unlike any he had ever touched in his millennia of existence. It was not elven, not mannish, not dwarven. It was a mind like a raging volcano, a core of pure, incandescent fury, banked beneath layers of cold, hard discipline and profound, ancient grief. It was a mind that radiated power, a raw, physical, divine power that felt utterly alien to the ordered magic of Arda. This was not one of the Astari. Their power felt of the West, of the Valar. This was not some lost Ainu or Maiar. This was something else, something new, something powerful. He saw, through the fading echoes of the slaughtered orcs' minds, a glimpse of the being. A giant, pale-skinned, marked with red, wielding weapons of ice and fire. A warrior of impossible strength and brutality. Annatar's own mind, a thing of intricate, multi-layered deception, began to work. This was an unforeseen variable. A powerful piece had just fallen onto the board, uninvited. How could it be used? Could this warrior be turned? Could his immense strength be harnessed, added to Sauron's own armies? A being who could slaughter orcs with such contemptuous ease would be a formidable weapon against the elves and the men of Numenor. Or was he a threat? Was this raw, chaotic power something that needed to be eliminated before it could disrupt his carefully laid plans? He decided on a course of cautious investigation. He would approach this being himself, not as Sauron, the Dark Lord, but as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He would offer friendship, knowledge, aid. He would probe the warrior's mind, learn his origins, his desires, his weaknesses. Every being had a weakness. Every being had a price. He had seduced the greatest elven smiths with promises of power. Surely, this brutish warrior could be bought as well. He excused himself from Celebrimbor's counsel, citing a need for solitary contemplation. He cloaked himself in his fair form, radiating an aura of benevolent wisdom and light. He left the city of Ost in Edhill and ventured into the forests, alone, following the lingering psychic spoor of the stranger, a master fisherman casting a lure into dark, unknown waters. He was Sauron the Deceiver, and he was about to meet a man who had made a career out of killing gods who thought themselves clever. Kratos moved through the forest with a grim, relentless purpose. He knew his target, Sauron, Mordor. But this land was vast, unknown. He needed guidance, a path. It was Mimir who spotted him first. "Brother, hold up. Company." Kratos stopped, his hand instinctively going to the Leviathan axe. Atreus nocked an arrow. They waited, silent and still as the ancient trees around them. A figure emerged from the dappled sunlight. He was tall and fair, clad in robes of white and silver that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. His face was beautiful, noble, his eyes holding a depth of wisdom that seemed as old as the world. He moved with a graceful, effortless stride, radiating an aura of peace and benevolent power. It was Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, Sauron in his most seductive guise. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands held open in a gesture of peace. "Greetings, travelers." His voice was a melody, clear and resonant, perfectly mimicking the elven tongue Atreus had begun to decipher. "You seem lost and troubled. I sensed a disturbance, a struggle. Are you harmed?" Atreus lowered his bow slightly, disarmed by the figure's apparent kindness and regal bearing. He looked like one of the elf lords from the stories his mother used to tell. Kratos remained unmoved, his eyes narrowed, his grip tight on his axe. He felt the power radiating from this being, yes, but it felt too perfect, too smooth, like polished glass over a dark pit. He had met beings like this before, beings who offered aid with one hand while concealing a dagger in the other. "Who are you?" Kratos growled, the common tongue feeling rough and unfamiliar, translated through Atreus's subtle influence. The figure smiled, a warm, radiant expression. "I am called Annatar, a friend to the Eldar of this land, a giver of gifts and knowledge. I reside nearby, in the city of Ost in Edhill, where the great elven smiths practice their craft. I saw the light of your arrival, like a star falling from the heavens. And I felt the unfortunate end of the orc scouts who troubled these woods. A necessary act, I assure you. They are servants of a dark power that plagues this world." He spoke of Sauron, painting him as a distant, shadowy threat, a common enemy. He offered them sanctuary in Ost in Edhill, a place of light and learning where they could rest, recover, and learn more of this new world they had fallen into. "He lays it on thick, doesn't he?" Mimir whispered from Kratos' belt, his voice barely audible. "Reminds me of Odin in his younger days, when he was trying to wheedle secrets out of the giants. All smiles and pretty words. Watch yourself, brother. This one smells like trouble wrapped in perfume." Kratos listened to Mimir's warning. The head's wisdom, born of centuries of dealing with treacherous gods, often proved true. Yet, they needed information. They needed a base, and this Annatar, whatever his true nature, was offering both. "You offer sanctuary?" Kratos asked, his tone still suspicious. "And knowledge," Annatar replied smoothly. "You are clearly warriors of great power, strangers to this age. Perhaps our purposes align? Perhaps, together, we can stand against the shadow that gathers in the east?" He extended a hand, a gesture of friendship. Kratos looked at the hand, then into the being's luminous eyes. He felt the smooth, polished surface of Annatar's mind, a carefully constructed facade. But beneath it, he felt nothing. A void, a deliberate emptiness where a soul should be. It was the mark of a master deceiver. He made his decision. He would accept the offer. He would go to this city. He would learn what he could. But he would not trust this Annatar. He would watch him. And if he proved to be another god playing games, another tyrant in disguise, Kratos would deal with him as he had dealt with all the others. He would accept the gift, but he would keep his axe sharp. The city of Ost in Edhill was a marvel, a jewel of elven craft nestled in the green land of Eregion. Its towers were slender and graceful, its halls filled with light and music. It was a city dedicated to knowledge and creation, and at its heart were the great forges of the Gwaithai Myrdain, the people of the jewel smiths. Annatar led Kratos, Atreus, and Mimir through the city, his presence opening all doors. The elves they passed regarded Kratos with a mixture of awe and fear. They had heard tales of the giant warrior who had appeared in the woods, the one who radiated such raw, untamed power. They treated him with a cautious, respectful distance. Annatar brought them to the house of the Myrdain, the central guild hall and workshop of the elven smiths. Here, the air hummed with the energy of creation. Hammers rang on anvils, fires roared in great elegant furnaces, and elves with faces alight with focused intensity worked precious metals and jewels, their skill beyond anything Kratos had ever witnessed. And at the center of it all, overseeing the work with a proud, almost obsessive gleam in his eyes, was Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor, the greatest craftsman left in Middle-earth. He greeted Annatar warmly, as a student greets a beloved master. "Lord Annatar," Celebrimbor said, his voice ringing with enthusiasm. "The work proceeds apace. Your guidance has opened new paths of creation we never dreamed possible." He gestured towards a workbench where several rings lay, gleaming under the bright forge light. They were things of exquisite beauty, crafted from gold and silver, set with precious gems. But they also radiated a subtle, potent magic. "The 9 are nearing completion," Celebrimbor announced proudly, "and the 7 are well underway. Soon the lords of men and dwarves will have tools to preserve their realms against the decay of time, just as you promised." Kratos watched, his face impassive, but his mind cold and analytical. He felt the power in the rings, a subtle binding energy woven into their very substance. He felt Annatar's quiet satisfaction, a feeling like a spider watching a fly approach its web. "Tools to preserve?" Mimir whispered from his belt, his voice laced with cynicism. "Or tools to control? I've seen this play before, brother. Gods offering gifts, dwarves making necklaces. It always ends in tears and bloodshed. Usually, yours." Annatar turned to Kratos, his smile serene. "These are rings of power, stranger. Gifts forged with the combined skill of the Eldar and my own humble knowledge. They will help the lesser races, men and dwarves, to manage their realms, to resist the slow decline of this age. A noble work, is it not?" "Power is never given freely," Kratos growled, his distrust of Annatar solidifying into a cold certainty. "It always comes with a price. What price do these rings demand?" Annatar's smile did not falter, but his eyes grew colder. "The only price is wisdom, my friend. The wisdom to use such power for the betterment of all." But Kratos saw the lie. He saw the subtle web of control being woven around these unsuspecting elves. He saw the ambition burning behind Annatar's beautiful mask. This was no benevolent teacher. This was a manipulator, a deceiver, using these elves as unwitting pawns in a greater, darker game. He looked at the rings, gleaming on the workbench. He had seen artifacts of power before. He knew their lure. He knew their danger. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that these beautiful, innocent-seeming trinkets were instruments of a tyranny far more insidious than any blade or chain. They were shackles for the soul. Kratos spent several days in Ost in Edhill, an uneasy guest in a city intoxicated by its own creative fervor. He watched Annatar weave his spells of persuasion, his words like honey, his promises like glittering jewels. He saw how the elves, even the wise and ancient Celebrimbor, were utterly captivated, their pride and their desire for perfection making them blind to the darkness that walked among them. He saw the rings of power taking shape in the forges, their magic growing stronger, more potent, and more subtly menacing with each passing day. He felt the web of Annatar's influence tightening around the city, around Eregion, around the very future of this world. He remembered Ares, whispering promises of glory while leading him to damnation. He remembered Zeus, offering power while demanding absolute, soul-crushing obedience. He saw the same pattern repeating itself here, in a new world, with new faces, but with the same, inevitable, tragic end. He could not stand by and watch it happen again. He sought out Annatar in the high gardens of the city, where the Lord of Gifts often walked, his fair form a serene contrast to the fiery industry below. "Your work here is impressive," Kratos began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You have earned the trust of these elves. They see you as a savior." Annatar turned, his smile radiant. "I merely offer guidance, friend Kratos. The skill, the artistry, it is all theirs. I only help them unlock their true potential." "You help them forge chains," Kratos countered, his gaze hard and unyielding. Chains for themselves and for others. These rings you help them create. They are not gifts. They are weapons, tools of control. Anatar's smile tightened, the light in his eyes dimming slightly. You speak harshly. Power can be used for good, to bring order, to preserve beauty against the ravages of time. Is that not a worthy goal? Order imposed by one will upon others is tyranny, Kratos snarled. I have killed gods who preached such sermons. Your promises are lies. Your beauty is a mask. I see the shadow behind it. The confrontation hung in the air. A sudden, cold silence in the sunlit garden. Anatar regarded Kratos, his mask of benevolence finally slipping, revealing the ancient, cold, and utterly ruthless intelligence beneath. He had underestimated this warrior. The brute possessed a savage, inconvenient wisdom, born of his own, bloody history. You are a fool, Anatar said, his voice losing its melodic quality, becoming flat and cold. You see only the fist, not the mind that guides it. You understand only destruction, not the subtle art of creation, of control. You are a relic, a creature of a bygone age of simple violence. You have no place in the new order I am building. The only order you build is one of slaves and masters, Kratos retorted. And I will have no part in it. He turned to leave, but Anatar spoke again, his voice now a low, menacing hiss. You think you can interfere? You think you can stand against me? You are one. I have the loyalty of the greatest craftsmen of this age. Soon, I will have the loyalty of kings and lords. You are nothing. I am the one who kills gods like you, Kratos said over his shoulder, and he strode from the garden, leaving Anatar standing alone amidst the flowers, his fair face now a mask of cold, calculating fury. Kratos went directly to Celebrimbor. He found the elf lord in his private forge, his hands shaping a new, impossibly beautiful ring of mithril, set with a single, white gem. Lord Celebrimbor, Kratos began, his voice blunt, stripped of all pleasantry. You must stop this work. Anatar is deceiving you. Celebrimbor looked up, his face clouded with annoyance at the interruption. Deceiving me? Lord Anatar is the greatest friend our people have known in this age. His wisdom is guiding us to create works of power that will rival even those of my grandsire Feanor. His wisdom is poison, Kratos insisted. His gifts are traps. He seeks not to help you, but to use you, to enslave you, and all of Middle-earth, through these rings you forge. He spoke of his own past, of the gods he had served and slain, of the price of power offered by seemingly benevolent hands. He spoke with the raw, brutal honesty of a man who had paid that price in blood and ashes. But Celebrimbor would not listen. His pride was too great. His ambition was too deeply ingrained. He was on the verge of creating the ultimate masterpieces, works that would ensure his name was remembered forever. He could not, would not, believe that his friend, his mentor, Anatar, was the very evil they sought to defy. You are blinded by your own darkness, Kratos, Celebrimbor said dismissively, turning back to his forge. You see betrayal everywhere because you yourself are a creature of violence. Leave me to my work. You do not understand the subtleties of our craft or of our alliances. Kratos stood for a moment, watching the elf lord hunched over his creation, utterly lost in his own prideful obsession. He had tried. He had given the warning, but some lessons he knew could only be learned through fire and pain. He turned and left the forge, the rhythmic clang of Celebrimbor's hammer echoing behind him like a funeral dirge. The fall of Eregion was coming, and he could only watch it happen. Anatar knew his time in Eregion was drawing to a close. The confrontation with the Spartan warrior had been inconvenient. The brute's distrust was a potential catalyst that could awaken the elves from their power-induced slumber prematurely. He needed to accelerate his timetable. He needed the master ring. He made his final excuses to Celebrimbor, speaking of urgent matters in the east, promising to return soon with new knowledge, new secrets of craft to share. The elven lord, still captivated by his own genius and Anatar's flattery, suspected nothing. Sauron traveled south, shedding his fair form like a discarded cloak as he crossed the mountains into his own dark land. Mordor welcomed its master, the very air growing thick with his power, the fires of Orodruin burning brighter in anticipation. He ascended the volcano, the heat that would have incinerated any mortal a mere caress against his Maiar spirit. In the heart of the mountain, in the Sammath Naur, the chamber of fire, he began the final, terrible forging. He poured all his malice, all his cruelty, all his will to dominate every living thing into a single, simple band of plain gold. He spoke the ancient, terrible words of binding, words that echoed not just in the chamber, but in the minds of every being in Middle-earth connected to the magic of the world. Ashnazg Durbatuluk, Ashnazg Gimbatul, Ashnazg Thrakatuluk, Ag Borzum Ishi Krimpatul, one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. As he spoke the final words, he placed the newly forged one ring upon his finger. A wave of pure, black, unadulterated power erupted from Mount Doom. It was a psychic shockwave that rolled across Middle-earth like a physical blow. In Ost, in Edhill, the elven smiths cried out in agony and understanding. They felt the sudden, terrible presence in their minds, the master's will searing through the rings they wore, binding them, dominating them. They ripped the rings from their fingers, but it was too late. They had been seen. They had been revealed. Their deepest thoughts, their greatest works, were now laid bare before the Dark Lord. Celebrimbor, his face a mask of horrified betrayal, finally understood the true price of Anatar's gifts. In the forests of Eregion, Kratos felt it too. It was not the subtle, deceptive presence of Anatar. This was a tidal wave of pure, absolute, tyrannical power. It was the feeling of a god truly awakening, of a dark lord claiming his throne. He felt the agony of the elves, the sudden terrible realization of their enslavement. He gripped his axe, his knuckles white. He had been right. And now, the war he had foreseen was upon them. Sauron, standing in the fires of Mount Doom, the one ring glowing on his finger, let out a silent, triumphant laugh that echoed across the wasted plains of his land. His deception was complete. His power was absolute. The rings were his. The world would soon follow. His great eye, now fully manifest, turned its gaze west, towards Eregion, towards the elves who had dared to defy him, who had refused to surrender the 3 rings they had forged in secret, and towards the pale, furious warrior who had dared to see through his disguise. His demand went forth, carried on winds of shadow and despair. Surrender the rings of power, all of them. They belonged to Sauron. The elves refused. Their pride, though wounded, would not break entirely. Sauron's response was immediate and absolute. He unleashed his armies. From the Black Gate, from the passes of Cirith Ungol, a tide of orcs, trolls, and evil men poured forth, a black river of hate flooding into the green lands of the west. Their target, Eregion. Their orders, total annihilation. The war of the elves and Sauron had begun, and it began under the shadow of the One Ring and the unveiled, terrible might of the Dark Lord himself. The invasion was swift and brutal. Sauron's armies, empowered by his will flowing through the One Ring, moved with a speed and ferocity the elves of Eregion had not anticipated. They swarmed over the land, burning the forests, slaughtering the outlying settlements, a black tide converging on the jewel of the elven kingdom, Ost in Edhill. The city of the elven smiths, a place of light and creation, found itself under siege. The Gwaith Mirdan, masters of craft but not of war, fought with a desperate, tragic courage. Their elven blades sang, their bows felled orcs from the walls. But they were artisans, not soldiers, and they were hopelessly outnumbered. Celebrimbor himself led the defense, his heart filled with a bitter, self-recriminating fury. He fought like a hero of old, his sword reaping a terrible harvest among the orcs, his every blow fueled by the shame of his own folly. But it was not enough. The walls were breached. The orcs poured into the beautiful city, their guttural roars replacing the music of the elves, their torches setting the slender, graceful towers ablaze. It was into this scene of slaughter and despair that Kratos arrived. He had watched the invasion begin from the hills, his heart cold. He felt no particular loyalty to the elves. They had been arrogant fools, blinded by their own pride, but he felt an absolute, unwavering hatred for Sauron. The Dark Lord was a tyrant, a deceiver, a god-king in the making, and Kratos existed to kill such beings. He did not join the formal defense of the city. He did not seek out Celebrimbor or the elven commanders. He simply entered the fray, a solitary gray engine of destruction. He charged into the thickest concentration of the enemy, the Leviathan axe and the blades of chaos becoming a whirlwind of ice and fire. He was a god of war unleashed. He moved through the orc ranks not like a soldier fighting a battle, but like a force of nature reaping a harvest. The Leviathan axe froze orcs solid before shattering them into 1,000 icy fragments. Its return flight cleaved through a dozen more. The blades of chaos were fiery whips, incinerating trolls, tearing down crude siege engines, creating zones of absolute burning death around him. His Spartan rage, fueled by the sheer, overwhelming presence of Sauron's evil will, burned hotter than it had in centuries. He was a berserker, yes, but a disciplined one. Every blow was precise, every movement calculated for maximum devastation. He was not just killing orcs, he was breaking their formations, shattering their morale, disrupting their entire assault. The elves, fighting desperately on the walls and in the streets, saw him. They saw this strange, pale giant, marked with red, who fought with a fury that made their own measured elven rage seem like a child's tantrum. They saw him tear apart trolls with his bare hands. They saw him wade through seas of orcs as if they were knee-high grass. They did not understand him. They did not know if he was a savior or simply another, different kind of doom. But they knew he was fighting their enemy. And for now, that was enough. Sauron, directing the battle from afar, felt his presence. He felt the sector of his army that engaged the Grey Warrior simply cease to exist. He felt the cold, hard, divine fury that was punching holes in his unstoppable tide. He recognized the power he had encountered in the forest. The Spartan, his annoyance turned to cold, focused rage. This creature was more than just an obstacle. He was a challenge. A direct, physical challenge to Sauron's own might. This could not be allowed. The battle for Ost in Edhill became a chaotic, swirling vortex of violence, with Kratos at its heart. He was a singularity of destruction, a force multiplier that single-handedly held back entire sections of Sauron's overwhelming assault. The Dark Lord's armies, used to the predictable tactics of elves and men, had no answer for a single warrior who fought with the strength of a demigod and the fury of a betrayed soul. He moved through the burning city like a vengeful spirit. Where the elven lines were about to break, he would appear. The Leviathan axe, a blizzard of death, freezing orcs solid, shattering trolls' limbs, giving the beleaguered defenders a chance to rally. Where Sauron's siege engines pounded at the walls, he would leap into their midst, the blades of chaos turning the great wooden structures and the crews manning them into pillars of fire. Atreus and Mimir were forced to stay on the periphery, finding cover in the crumbling elven architecture. Atreus used his bow with deadly accuracy, picking off orc captains and warg riders from a distance, his arrows guided by a mixture of skill and his burgeoning Loki sense. Mimir shouted tactical advice and cynical commentary, his severed head somehow managing to project his voice over the din of battle. "Watch your left, brother. Nasty-looking troll with a hammer thinks he's Thor. Mind the archers on the tower, lad. Aim for the squinty one. Are all Dark Lords this unoriginal? Hordes of ugly minions? Been there, done that." The elves who witnessed Kratos' fight were both horrified and awestruck. Figures like Elrond, a young herald of Gil-galad at the time, and Galadriel, who had come from Lindon to aid Eregion, saw a power they could barely comprehend. He fought with none of the grace or artistry of the Eldar. His movements were brutal, direct, efficient. He did not wound. He obliterated. He did not seek honor in combat. He sought only the absolute destruction of his foe. He was a necessary evil, perhaps, a force of nature unleashed against the greater darkness. But they could feel the rage that fueled him, a rage that was terrifyingly close to the darkness they fought. They accepted his aid, but they did not trust him. He was a weapon, yes, but a weapon that might easily turn in their own hands. Kratos himself was lost in the red tide of battle. The familiar, glorious release of combat, the simple, brutal clarity of kill or be killed, was a balm to his weary soul. Every orc he slaughtered, every troll he dismembered, was a small measure of vengeance against the gods, against the tyrants, against the Sauron who was the architect of this suffering. He sought out the strongest foes. He battled orc champions clad in black plate, their crude strength no match for his divine power. He wrestled mountain trolls into submission, breaking their backs over his knee. He even faced down a pack of snarling wargs, tearing them apart with his bare hands in a display of primal fury that made even the orcs pause in terror. He was the god of war, returned to his true element. And the fields of Eregion ran red with the blood of his enemies. Sauron, observing the battle through the eyes of his orc commanders and the subtle whispers of his will, felt his cold rage growing. His perfectly planned siege, his unstoppable tide of conquest, was being single-handedly disrupted by one single, infuriating anomaly. The Spartan, this being's raw, physical power was beyond anything he had anticipated. It was like a force of nature. A localized earthquake and blizzard rolled into one, tearing through his legions. His orcs, even his trolls, were dying in droves, their morale beginning to crack under the sheer, brutal impact of Kratos' assault. He could not allow this to continue. This warrior had to be neutralized. Sauron, now clad in his own terrible black armor, his presence a suffocating weight of dread on the battlefield, decided to intervene more directly. He would not face the Spartan himself, not yet. That would be admitting the creature was his equal. But he would unleash the power of his new, greatest weapon. He raised his hand, the one that bore the One Ring. The plain gold band seemed to pulse with a dark, fiery light. He focused his immense will, pouring it through the ring, and projected it outwards, not as a wave of terror, but as a focused beam of command and amplification. He targeted his own champions, the orc captains, the troll chieftains, and more importantly, his newest, most terrible servants, the Nazgul. The 9 men, kings and sorcerers who had been gifted rings of power, were already falling under his dominion. Their rings, forged by Celebrimbor but ultimately mastered by the One, were now conduits for Sauron's will. He poured his power into them, accelerating their transformation, stoking their fear and greed, binding them ever tighter to his command. They were not yet the spectral, bodiless ring-wraiths they would become. They were still men, clad in the armor of their former kingdoms, but their eyes now burned with a cold, malevolent light, their wills no longer their own, and they were powerful. "Go!" Sauron's command echoed in their minds, a silent, irresistible order. "Find the Grey Warrior. Break him. Bring me his head." The Nazgul, acting as one, spurred their great black war horses. They moved through the chaos of the battle, a wedge of black, implacable death. Lesser orcs scrambled out of their path. Even the trolls seemed to shy away from their chilling presence. They found Kratos where the fighting was thickest, a whirlwind of ice and fire in a sea of orc bodies. They attacked not as individuals, but as a coordinated unit, their movements guided by the singular will of their master, amplified through the One Ring. One charged from the front, his ancient sword aiming for Kratos' head. 2 flanked him, their movements perfectly synchronized, their blades seeking gaps in his defense. Another fired darts of black sorcery from a distance, bolts of pure unlight that sizzled against Kratos' skin, causing him actual pain. Kratos roared, surprised by the sudden, coordinated, and powerful assault. These were not mere orcs. These were warriors of skill and power, their every move imbued with a dark, chilling energy. He met their charge. The Leviathan axe clashed against a black sword, the impact sending a shockwave through the air. The blades of chaos lashed out, parrying another blow, searing the black armor of a Nazgul's steed. He was fighting 9 powerful opponents at once, each one a skilled warrior, their attacks amplified and coordinated by the will of Sauron himself. He was strong, but he was outnumbered. He began to take wounds, A black blade slipped past his guard, scoring a deep, cold wound on his arm. A sorcerous bolt struck his leg, causing the muscle to seize momentarily. He fought back with the fury of a cornered god, his Spartan rage surging. He shattered one Nazgul's sword with his axe. He wrapped a blade of chaos around another's neck, pulling him from his horse. But for every one he disabled, two more pressed the attack. Sauron was watching, feeling the struggle through the ring. He saw the Spartan finally being pushed back, wounded, overwhelmed. A cold, cruel smile touched the Dark Lord's unseen lips. Raw power was meaningless against true, coordinated, and absolute dominion. The Spartan would fall, and then the city would fall, and then the world. The intervention of the Nazgul, empowered and coordinated by Sauron's One Ring, was the decisive blow. Kratos, wounded and forced onto the defensive by the relentless, multi-pronged assault, could no longer be everywhere at once. The breach in the elven lines that he had been holding was finally overwhelmed. The main host of Mordor poured through the gap, a black tide that flooded the streets of Ost in Edhill. The desperate last stand of the elven smiths began. Kratos fought like a cornered lion, his axe and blades a whirlwind of death against the Nazgul. He managed to grievously wound two of them, forcing their physical forms to temporarily dissipate, but the remaining seven pressed their attack, their dark magic and coordinated strikes keeping him pinned down, unable to aid the failing elven defense. He saw it happening. He saw the beautiful, slender towers engulfed in flames. He heard the dying screams of the elves, a sound of sorrow and despair that echoed even over the roar of battle. He saw Celebrimbor, on the steps of the House of the Mirdan, fighting back to back with a handful of his surviving craftsmen, making a final, hopeless stand. A part of him, the cold, pragmatic Spartan general, knew the battle was lost. The city was falling. His own survival dictated that he should retreat, escape to fight another day. But another part of him, the part that hated gods and tyrants, the part that had seen this exact scene play out before, a city burning, innocents dying, all because of the ambition of one being, could not turn away. With a final, explosive roar of pure, divine fury, he unleashed the full power of his Spartan rage, not as a controlled weapon, but as a nova. A shockwave of incandescent, psychic energy erupted from him, throwing the remaining Nazgul back, momentarily stunning them, their connection to Sauron flickering under the sheer, raw force of his wrath. He used that moment not to flee, but to charge. He charged towards the House of the Mirdain, towards Celebrimbor, carving a bloody path through the sea of orcs that now filled the plaza. He arrived too late. He saw Sauron himself, a towering figure in black armor, the One Ring blazing on his finger, strike Celebrimbor down. He saw the Dark Lord seize the elven smith, his prize, and drag him away towards the great forges, intending to torture the secrets of the rings from him. Kratos roared and lunged at Sauron, his Leviathan axe aimed at the Dark Lord's head. Sauron turned, his eyes behind his helm burning with a cold, amused light. He did not even raise his mace. He simply held up the hand that bore the ring. Kratos felt a power like nothing he had ever known. It was not a physical blow. It was a wave of pure, absolute domination. It slammed into his mind, into his very soul, trying to crush his will, to bind him, to make him kneel. He fought it. His own will, the will that had defied Zeus himself, met the power of the ring head-on. The air between them crackled. Kratos staggered, driven to one knee, the sheer, unholy pressure immense. But he did not break. He would not kneel. Sauron frowned, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. This mortal's will was formidable, but ultimately meaningless. He had what he came for. Celebrimbor, the 9, the 7, the city was his. He gave a silent command, and the remaining Nazgul, recovering from Kratos' blast, converged on the kneeling warrior, their blades ready. Sauron turned his back, dragging the captured Celebrimbor away into the burning heart of the city. Kratos was left kneeling, surrounded by ringwraiths, the city of Ost in Edhill burning around him. He had fought. He had failed. The elves were doomed. The tyrant had won. A cold, familiar despair threatened to engulf him. But then, the rage returned. Colder, harder, and more focused than ever before. This was not over. He would endure. He would escape. And he would hunt Sauron down. He would tear the ring from his finger, and he would make him pay. The fall of Ost in Edhill was a catastrophic blow to the free peoples of Middle-earth. The fairest city of the Noldor in exile was reduced to a smoking ruin. Celebrimbor, the greatest craftsman of the age, was captured, tortured, and ultimately slain, hung upon a pole as a banner for Sauron's advancing armies. Sauron himself recovered 15 of the rings of power, the 9 destined for mortal men, and 6 of the 7 intended for the dwarf lords. 1 Celebrimbor had already given away. Only the 3 rings of the elves, forged by Celebrimbor alone and untouched by Sauron's hand, remained hidden, their whereabouts unknown to the Dark Lord. With Eregion destroyed, Sauron's path was clear. His main objective was now the utter annihilation of the remaining elven strongholds. Lindon, the kingdom of the High King Gil-galad, nestled between the Blue Mountains and the sea, and the hidden valley of Rivendell, where Elrond, herald of Gil-galad, was gathering the refugees of the fallen city. Sauron's vast armies, flushed with victory and empowered by the ring, began their relentless march westward. Orcs, trolls, Easterlings, Haradrim, a seemingly endless tide of darkness swept across the plains of Eriador. The free peoples were scattered, demoralized, their hope dwindling. But Sauron's conquest was not proceeding as smoothly as he had anticipated. A persistent, infuriating thorn remained in his side. Kratos, the Spartan warrior, had not died in the fall of Ost in Edhill. He had vanished. He had fought his way clear of the Nazgul, using a combination of brute force and tactical cunning, exploiting the chaos of the burning city to slip away into the wilderness. And now, he was waging a one-man war against Sauron's advancing legions. He was a phantom, a ghost of vengeance haunting the flanks of the Dark Lord's armies. He moved through the land like a force of nature, striking without warning, leaving behind only devastation and the terrified whispers of the few orcs who survived his wrath. He would appear from the mists to ambush supply columns, the Leviathan axe freezing supply wagons solid, the blades of chaos incinerating pack animals and their drivers. He would collapse bridges before advancing armies, using his immense strength to tear stone from its foundations. He would stalk orc encampments at night, a silent, gray predator, leaving behind only headless corpses and the lingering scent of ozone and burnt flesh. He hunted the Nazgul relentlessly. He could sense their cold presence, and he met them whenever he could. He could not destroy their spirits, not permanently, but he could shatter their physical forms, banishing them back to Mordor, disrupting Sauron's command structure and spreading fear even among the ringwraiths themselves. The Witch King, in particular, developed a specific, terrified hatred for the Grey Warrior, avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. Sauron felt every blow, every disruption, through the subtle web of his own will that connected him to his armies. The Spartan was not just killing his soldiers. He was slowing his advance. He was sowing chaos. He was becoming a symbol of defiance that was beginning to inspire flickers of hope in the hearts of his enemies. He was no longer just an anomaly. He was Sauron's main obstacle. The Dark Lord, sitting on his dark throne in the rebuilt Barad-dûr, his power now nearly absolute, found himself increasingly consumed by a cold, obsessive rage directed at this single, infuriating mortal. He could crush the elves of Lindon. He could overwhelm the men of Númenor should they dare to interfere. But this Kratos, he was different. He was a force that did not play by the rules of this world. Sauron diverted more and more of his resources to the hunt. He sent his most elite Uruk trackers. He sent packs of wargs led by orc chieftains promised great rewards. He sent his remaining Nazgul, ordering them to hunt as a pack, to overwhelm the Spartan with their combined terror and sorcery. But Kratos was always one step ahead. He was a master hunter himself, and his instincts, combined with Mimir's counsel and Atreus's subtle Loki senses, allowed him to evade every trap, to turn every ambush back on his pursuers. He became a legend among Sauron's forces, They did not know his name. They called him Ash Skin for his pale complexion, the Red Storm for the swirling tattoos and the fury of his attacks, and, most commonly, and most fearfully, the God Butcher, a name whispered in the dark, a name that spoke of a power that could challenge the very foundations of their dark faith. Sauron realized that his conquest could not be complete while this single warrior still drew breath. The God Butcher had to be eliminated. Permanently. The war for Eriador became Kratos' personal hunting ground. He was a force unbound, his rage given a singular righteous focus against the tide of darkness that Sauron had unleashed. He, Atreus, and Mimir became ghosts of vengeance, moving through the war-torn land, leaving a trail of shattered orc legions and terrified whispers in their wake. His legend grew, not just among his enemies, but among the scattered remnants of the free peoples. Elven scouts from Lindon would report impossible sights. A single, gray warrior holding a pass against 1,000 orcs, his axe freezing the very air, his chained blades weaving a tapestry of fire. Dwarven travelers, cut off from their homes in the Blue Mountains, spoke of being saved from warg packs by a giant with red markings who tore the beasts apart with his bare hands before vanishing back into the mists. He became a symbol, an enigma. Was he one of the Valar, returned in wrath, a Maya of Aula, given form to battle the darkness? Or something else, something older, stranger, and far more dangerous? No one knew. They only knew that where he walked, the servants of Sauron died. The Nazgul learned to fear him. He could not destroy their spirits permanently, but his weapons, imbued with the divine power of his own alien world, inflicted a pain upon their spectral forms that few others could. His Leviathan axe, with its absolute zero cold, could freeze their connection to the physical world, making them brittle, vulnerable. His blades of chaos, born of primordial fire, seared their spirits, leaving wounds that even their master struggled to heal. He hunted them. He learned their patterns, their weaknesses. He would lure them into traps, using Atreus' arrows as distractions, Mimir's knowledge to predict their movements. He faced the Witch King again, in the ruins of an old Arnorian watchtower. The duel was furious, the Lord of the Nazgul wielding his dark sorcery, Kratos his raw, divine power. Kratos prevailed again, shattering the Witch King's physical form and sending his spirit fleeing back to Mordor in utter humiliation. The fear the Nazgul projected was potent, but Kratos' own aura of pure, focused rage was a psychic shield that even their despair could not penetrate. Sauron was forced to adapt. He could no longer rely on his greatest servants to lead his armies effectively while the God Butcher hunted them. He began to consolidate his forces, moving in larger, more heavily defended legions, sacrificing speed for security. Kratos adapted in turn. He could no longer take on entire legions head-on. He became a master of guerrilla warfare. He used the terrain, his knowledge gleaned from Mimir and his own instincts, to his advantage. He caused avalanches in the mountain passes, burying orc columns under tons of rock. He diverted rivers, flooding encampments. He started forest fires, using Atreus' fire arrows to create walls of flame that channeled Sauron's armies into kill zones. He was bleeding the Dark Lord, drop by agonizing drop. He could not stop the main advance, not alone. But he was making Sauron pay for every league, every mile, in blood and resources. His brutality, however, was also noted by his unwilling, potential allies. Elrond, receiving reports in Rivendell, was deeply troubled. Kratos fought their enemy, yes, but his methods were savage, absolute, leaving no survivors, offering no quarter. He was a force of pure destruction, and Elrond feared that such a force, once unleashed, could not easily be contained or controlled. Yet, necessity dictated their silence. Kratos was the only power in Eriador capable of slowing Sauron's advance, of buying time for Gil-galad and the men of Numenor to muster their own forces for the inevitable final confrontation. He was their horrifying, unpredictable, and utterly indispensable shield. Kratos himself cared little for legends or the opinions of elves. He had one goal: Sauron. Every orc he killed, Every Nazgul he banished was merely a step on the path towards the true enemy. He was forging his own legend, yes, but it was a legend written in blood and fueled by a singular burning desire for vengeance against the God King who dared to claim this world as his own. Years turned into decades. The war of the elves and Sauron raged across Eriador. Kratos remained a phantom menace, a constant drain on Sauron's resources, a figure of terror that haunted the Dark Lord's legions. Lindon held, thanks in part to Kratos' relentless harrying of Sauron's northern armies. Rivendell remained a hidden sanctuary. The men of Numenor, finally roused to action, landed their great hosts at the Grey Havens, pushing Sauron's forces back. The war reached its climax. The last alliance of elves and men was formed. They marched east, defeating Sauron's armies on the great plain of Dagorlad. They laid siege to Barad-dûr itself. Kratos watched it all from the shadows. He had played his part. He had bled Sauron, disrupted his plans, weakened his forces. Now, the elves and men were doing the heavy lifting, the glorious, suicidal work of assaulting the Dark Lord's fortress. He could have joined them. He could have stood beside Elendil and Gil-galad on the slopes of Mount Doom. But that was not his way. He did not fight for alliances. He did not fight for glory. He fought for the kill. He knew, with a certainty that resonated from his own god-killing past, that simply defeating Sauron's armies was not enough. The Dark Lord himself had to be confronted, destroyed utterly. As the siege of Barad-dûr ground on, Kratos made his decision. He would not wait for the Dark Lord to emerge. He would go to him. He would take the fight to the heart of the Black Land. "It's madness, brother," Mimir protested, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Barad-dûr is the greatest fortress in this world. Its walls are built with the power of the ring itself, and he's in there, waiting, gathering his strength. He is a god," Kratos stated simply, as if that explained everything. "And I kill gods." Atreus, now a young man, his face grim and hardened by years of war, looked at his father. "We will go with you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Kratos looked at his son. He saw the determination in his eyes, the loyalty. But he also saw the fear. This was not a journey for a boy, even a boy who was also a god. This was a descent into the heart of absolute evil. "No," Kratos said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your path lies elsewhere. You will stay with the elves. You will learn from them, find your own way." It was as close to a farewell as he could manage. He left them then, Atreus and Mimir, under the watchful, if wary, protection of Elrond's folk. His own path lay south, into the land of shadow. Alone, he traveled not as a warrior seeking battle, but as a hunter tracking his ultimate prey. He bypassed the siege lines, slipping through the mountains of ash like a ghost. He entered Mordor, a land of choking fumes, sharp rock, and despair. He felt the oppressive weight of Sauron's will, a constant, crushing presence. But his own will, forged in the fires of Spartan discipline and divine rage, was a shield against it. He moved through the land, unseen, unheard. His senses focused on the one, single point of absolute darkness in this world, the Dark Tower itself. He saw the armies of Mordor, vast and terrible, still guarding their master's fortress. He saw the Nazgûl circling the tower like black vultures. He saw the fiery eye at its peak, its gaze fixed outwards, towards the siege lines, unaware of the doom that was creeping towards it from within. He reached the base of Barad-dûr. It was not a fortress. It was a mountain range of black iron and obsidian, a structure built not just with stone, but with hate, fear, and dark sorcery. Its gates were impenetrable. Its walls were unscalable. But Kratos was not a soldier laying siege. He was a god-killer, and he would find a way in. He began his final ascent, a lone, gray figure against the black heart of the world, ready to face the Dark Lord in his own sanctum. Barad-dûr was more than a fortress. It was a living extension of Sauron's will, a monument to his power and malice. Its black walls were impossibly high, its gates forged of adamant and spells, guarded by sleepless watchers and legions of Sauron's most fearsome servants. To assault it directly was suicide. Kratos did not assault it directly. He breached it. He found his entry point not at the main gates, but high up, on a lesser guarded section of the outer wall, near a great, steaming vent that spewed noxious fumes from the fortress's deep forges. He leaped. His divine strength carried him 50 feet up the sheer obsidian face. He slammed the blades of chaos into the rock, their fiery edges finding purchase where mortal steel could not. He began to climb. He moved like a spider, scaling the impossible wall, ignoring the searing heat from the vent, the chilling presence of the Nazgul circling far above. He was a force of pure, focused will, and the fortress's physical defenses were meaningless against such determination. He reached a parapet, swung himself over, and landed silently in the shadows. He was inside. The interior of Barad-dûr was a nightmare labyrinth of black iron corridors, vast echoing chambers lit by the sullen glow of forge fires, and pits filled with tormented creatures. The air hummed with dark sorcery and the constant, oppressive weight of Sauron's presence. He moved through the fortress like a ghost, his senses guiding him, bypassing patrols of heavily armored Uruks, avoiding the gaze of watchful, disembodied eyes that floated in the shadows. He was a predator in the heart of the enemy's den, but his presence could not remain hidden for long. An alarm klaxon, a deep groaning horn, echoed through the fortress. He had been detected. The fortress came alive. Doors slammed shut. Portcullises of black iron crashed down, and from every corridor, the elite guard of Barad-dûr converged on his position. They were Uruks, but larger, stronger, clad in black plate armor of superior make, their eyes burning with a cold, hateful intelligence. They were Sauron's chosen, his dark equivalent of the Praetorian Guard. Kratos met them in a great vaulted hall. He did not retreat. He did not hide. He stood his ground. The Leviathan axe in one hand, a blade of chaos in the other. The battle was furious. The Uruk elites were formidable warriors, their strength and skill far surpassing the common orcs he had faced before. They fought with a disciplined ferocity, their attacks coordinated, their black blades seeking every gap in his defense. Kratos became a whirlwind of death. He was outnumbered 100 to 1, but he was a god. His axe froze Uruks solid, shattering them with follow-up blows. His blade incinerated them, turning them into pillars of black smoke. He used his Spartan shield, bashing them back, breaking their formations. He unleashed his Spartan rage, his divine power surging, turning him into an unstoppable juggernaut. He fought his way upwards, level by bloody level, leaving behind a trail of shattered Uruk bodies. He faced Olog-hai, the great, intelligent battle trolls of Mordor, crushing their skulls with his bare hands. He faced sorcerers, acolytes of Sauron who wielded dark magic, their spells breaking harmlessly against his divine resilience before his axe silenced their incantations forever. He was a single, gray warrior, waging war against the heart of an empire of darkness. Finally, he reached the highest levels of the tower. The air here was thin, cold, and saturated with Sauron's power. He stood before a great iron door, inscribed with runes of power that writhed like living snakes. This was it, the inner sanctum, the throne room of the Dark Lord. He did not knock. He raised his axe and brought it down. The ancient runes flared, resisting his blow. He struck again, and again, pouring his full, godlike strength into each impact. The door groaned, buckled, and then exploded inwards in a shower of molten iron and shattered spells. He strode into the chamber beyond. It was a vast, dark space, lit only by the fiery glow of the great eye visible through a massive window, and by the sullen, red light emanating from the figure who stood waiting for him in the center of the room. Sauron. He stood in the heart of the abyss, the throne room of the Dark Lord. The chamber was vast, cold, and silent, dominated by the immense arched window through which the fiery, lidless eye watched the world. And in the center, waiting, stood Sauron. He was no longer the fair Anatar. He was a towering figure clad in black, jagged armor of exquisite, terrible craftsmanship. His helm was a spiked crown of menace, his gauntlets ended in sharp, cruel talons. In his right hand, he wielded a great, black mace, radiating an aura of pure, crushing power. And on the forefinger of his left hand, it rested. A simple, plain band of gold, yet it pulsed with a dark, fiery light that seemed to draw all energy towards it. The One Ring. Sauron regarded Kratos, not with rage, but with a cold, ancient amusement. "So," his voice echoed in the chamber, a sound of grinding stone and dry, sibilant whispers. "The God Butcher himself has come to my hearth. I should be honored. Or perhaps insulted." "I have come to end you," Kratos growled, the Leviathan axe held ready, its icy aura a stark contrast to the oppressive heat radiating from the Dark Lord. Sauron laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "End me, mortal fool. I am Sauron. I am eternal. I endured the fall of the Elder King. I command the shadows. I hold the very fate of this world in my hand." He raised the hand that bore the ring. "You are merely a distraction, a brutish, chaotic force that will now be extinguished." He attacked. He did not charge. He simply unleashed his power. A wave of pure, black sorcery erupted from him, a tide of shadow and despair that washed over Kratos. Kratos met it with his own divine resilience, his will a fortress against the dark magic. But the sheer, oppressive force of it staggered him. Sauron followed with his mace. The weapon descended with the weight of a falling mountain. Kratos met the blow with his axe. The impact was cataclysmic. A shockwave shattered the obsidian floor, sending fissures racing across the chamber. Kratos felt his arm go numb from the sheer, bone-jarring force. Sauron's physical strength, amplified by the ring, was immense. The duel began. It was a battle of mythic proportions, waged in the heart of darkness. Kratos fought with the full fury of a god of war, his axe and blades a whirlwind of elemental destruction. He was faster, more agile, his combat skills honed over centuries of killing gods. Sauron fought with the power of a fallen Maiar, the cunning of the deceiver, and the absolute dominating force of the One Ring. His mace struck with the force of earthquakes. His sorcery summoned shadows that clawed and tore. His very presence was a weapon, draining the will, promising despair. They traded blows that would have leveled mountains. Kratos scored deep gouges in Sauron's black armor with his axe, the ice magic causing the metal to smoke and hiss. Sauron landed crushing blows with his mace, denting Kratos' divine armor, breaking bones that instantly began to knit back together. It was a battle of raw power against absolute dominion. Kratos fought to destroy, Sauron fought to enslave. Kratos realized he could not win through attrition. Sauron's power, fueled by the ring, seemed limitless. He had to end this. Now, he had to get to the ring. He feinted with the axe, forcing Sauron to block high. As the Dark Lord raised his mace, Kratos dropped low and unleashed the blades of chaos. The fiery blades wrapped around Sauron's legs, pulling him off balance. Sauron stumbled, roaring in rage. Kratos seized the opening. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with his bare hands. He tackled the Dark Lord around the waist, his immense strength driving them both crashing to the floor. They grappled on the floor, two titans locked in a primal struggle. Sauron tried to bring his mace down, but Kratos held his arm fast. Kratos tried to reach the ring, but Sauron's clawed gauntlet blocked his path. It was a contest of pure, physical will. And Kratos, the god of war, was stronger. With a final, explosive roar of pure, divine fury, he broke Sauron's grip. He pinned the Dark Lord beneath him. He raised his fist, ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. But Sauron laughed again, a sound of triumphant malice. "Fool, you cannot destroy me. While the ring exists, I exist." Kratos paused, his fist hovering over Sauron's helmeted face. He looked down at the hand that bore the ring. Sauron was right. Destroying his physical form was not enough. The ring itself had to be dealt with. And in that moment of hesitation, Sauron unleashed the ring's ultimate power. Not as a weapon, but as a temptation. He opened his mind, pouring the ring's promise directly into Kratos' soul. Take it, take the ring. With it, you can have everything. You can undo your past, you can save your family, you can become the god you were always meant to be. Kratos felt the lure, the promise of an end to his pain, the same temptation he had faced and rejected before. But this time, it was different. It was raw, unfiltered, absolute. He roared, a sound of pure, agonizing conflict. And then, he made his choice. Not with reason, but with instinct. The instinct of a killer. The instinct of a god who had learned, the hard way, that power was the only truth. He did not strike Sauron's head. His hand shot down, faster than thought, and he seized Sauron's hand, the hand that bore the ring. He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone and buckling metal. Sauron screamed, a sound of pure, absolute agony, as his fingers, his hand, his very connection to his power, were crushed in the Spartan's grip. Kratos ripped the ring and the finger it resided on from Sauron's hand. Sauron's physical form exploded, not into light, but into shadow and dust, his essence violently severed from its anchor. His armor clattered to the floor, empty. His scream echoed, faded, and was gone. Kratos stood slowly, breathing heavily. Sauron was defeated, vanquished, his physical form destroyed. In his hand he held the one ring, still attached to the severed finger of the Dark Lord. It pulsed with a dark, immense, and utterly intoxicating power. It whispered to him, no longer needing Sauron as its conduit. Master, he looked at the ring. He looked at the empty armor of his fallen foe. He had done it. He had killed the god of this world. He stood victorious in the heart of the enemy's fortress, and the ultimate symbol of power was now his. A slow, cold, and terrible smile touched Kratos' lips. The whispers began, promises of order, of strength, of a world remade in his own brutal image. The silence in the dark tower was absolute, save for the sound of his own heavy breathing and the soft, seductive song of the One Ring.